On a cold, windswept beach in North Carolina, December 17, 1903, two bicycle mechanics from Ohio prepared to attempt something that humanity had dreamed of since ancient times: controlled, powered flight in a heavier-than-air machine. At 10:35 a.m., Orville Wright climbed aboard a fragile contraption of wood, fabric, and wire, while his brother Wilbur steadied the wing. 12 seconds later, Aviation was born. What followed was not just the invention of the airplane, but the transformation of human civilization, shrinking the world and changing warfare, commerce, and society forever.
The dream of flight. Humanity's desire to fly is as old as recorded history. Ancient myths tell of Icarus flying too close to the sun with wings of feathers and wax. Leonardo da Vinci sketched flying machines in the 15th century, envisioning ornithopters that would flap like birds. Hot air balloons achieved flight in the 1780s, but they drifted with the wind rather than being truly controlled. By the late 19th century, numerous inventors were working on the problem of powered, controlled flight, but none had succeeded. The challenge was immense. A flying machine needed to be light enough to get airborne, but strong enough to withstand the forces of flight. It needed sufficient power to overcome gravity and air resistance, but engines of the era were heavy and weak. Most critically, it needed a control system that would allow a pilot to maintain stability and maneuver the aircraft, a problem that had defeated every previous attempt. By the 1990s, many believed powered flight was impossible, or at least decades away. Otto Lilienthal, a German aviation pioneer, had made more than 2,000 glider flights before dying in a crash in 1896. Samuel Langley, secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, had spent years and enormous sums developing powered aircraft that crashed spectacularly during attempted flights in 1903. Most scientists and engineers believed that if flight was possible at all, it would require massive government funding and the work of highly credentialed experts. Into this environment stepped two brothers from Dayton, Ohio, who operated a bicycle shop and had no formal engineering education, no government funding, and no prestigious credentials. Wilbur Wright, born in 1867, and Orville Wright, born in 1871, seemed unlikely candidates to solve a problem that had defeated humanity's best minds for centuries.
The bicycle mechanics who changed the world. The Wright brothers' background gave them unusual advantages for tackling the problem of flight. Their bicycle business provided mechanical skills, an understanding of balance and control, and, most importantly, a methodical approach to solving technical problems. They didn't approach flight as a theoretical problem to be solved through mathematical calculations, but as a practical engineering challenge requiring systematic experimentation and refinement. "We knew that men had been trying to fly for hundreds of years," Wilbur later wrote, "and that in all that time, no one had succeeded in building a practical flying machine. We concluded that the problem must be difficult, but not necessarily impossible. We decided to study what others had done, learn from their mistakes, and approach the problem systematically." The brothers began their research in 1899, reading everything they could find about previous flight attempts. They studied Lilienthal's work on gliders, examined the failures of Langley and others, and identified what they believed was the fundamental problem control. Previous inventors had focused on getting airborne and assumed that stability would naturally follow. The Wrights realized that aircraft were inherently unstable and required active control systems. We saw that the problem of flight was not just getting into the air, but controlling the machine once airborne. A flying machine is like riding a bicycle. It's inherently unstable, and you must constantly make adjustments to maintain balance and direction. This insight led to the Wrights' most important innovation: three-axis control. They developed a system that allowed the pilot to control the aircraft in pitch, nose up or down, roll, banking left or right, and yaw, turning left or right. The wing warping mechanism they invented allowed the pilot to twist the wings to control roll, the same principle later used in ailerons on modern aircraft. An elevator at the front controlled pitch, and a rudder at the rear controlled yaw. Beginning in 1900, the Wrights built a series of gliders to test their control concepts. They chose Kitty Hawk, North Carolina as their testing ground, a remote location with steady winds, soft sand for landings, and privacy from curious observers. Over 3 years, they conducted more than 1,000 glider flights, systematically refining their designs and mastering the art of piloting. The experimentation was dangerous and exhausting. Crashes were frequent, with the brothers suffering bruises, cuts, and occasional more serious injuries. The conditions at Kitty Hawk were harsh: fierce winds, cold temperatures, mosquitoes in summer, and isolation from comforts. But the brothers persisted, driven by the conviction that they were close to solving a problem that had defeated everyone else. The difficulty was not in any one part of the machine, but in making all the parts work together harmoniously. Each change we made affected everything else. We had to test, observe, measure, and refine constantly. It was tedious work, but we were making progress.
The engine problem. By 1903, the Wrights had mastered glider flight. Their 1902 glider could be controlled reliably, could fly for extended periods, and had demonstrated the validity of their control system. The next step was adding power, an engine and propellers that could generate enough thrust to overcome drag and maintain flight without relying on wind and gravity. The engine requirement presented a new challenge. The Wrights needed an engine that produced at least 8 to 10 horsepower while weighing no more than 200 pounds, a power-to-weight ratio that no existing engine could achieve. They approached automobile engine manufacturers, but none could or would build what they needed. Finally, they concluded they would have to build their own. Charles Taylor, the mechanic who worked in the Wrights' bicycle shop, designed and built the engine in just 6 weeks during the winter of 1902-1903. The aluminum engine had 4 cylinders, produced approximately 12 horsepower, and weighed 180 pounds, including fuel and cooling systems. It was crude by later standards, noisy, vibration-prone, and temperamental, but it met the critical requirement of sufficient power with acceptable weight. The propeller design proved even more challenging than the engine. The Wrights discovered that existing marine propeller theory didn't apply to aerial propellers because air and water behave very differently. They had to develop their own theory of propeller action, essentially inventing the field of propeller aerodynamics. They carved their propellers from laminated spruce, testing different shapes and pitches until they achieved acceptable efficiency. The propeller problem nearly defeated us, Orville recalled. We thought it would be simple, just adapt marine propellers to air use. But nothing worked as we expected.
We had to start from first principles, conducting our own research and calculations. The final propellers were more efficient than anything that had come before, but reaching that design required months of difficult work. By fall 1903, the Wrights had assembled their powered aircraft, the Wright Flyer. It had a wingspan of 40 feet, weighed about 600 pounds, and with the pilot aboard, would weigh approximately 750 pounds. The wing design was based on their successful 1902 glider, modified to carry the additional weight of engine and propellers. The structure was wood, primarily spruce and ash, covered with unbleached muslin fabric. Wire bracing provided structural strength. The aircraft looked fragile, because it was fragile. The structure had been engineered to minimize weight with almost no safety margin. A hard landing or unexpected stress could damage or destroy the machine. The pilot lay prone on the lower wing, reducing drag but offering no protection in a crash. The controls were primitive, wires and levers that required constant attention and adjustment.
The historic flight. The Wrights shipped the Flyer to Kitty Hawk in late September 1903, but problems delayed testing. Cold weather, storms, and mechanical difficulties pushed the first flight attempt into December. Samuel Langley's well-funded aircraft failed spectacularly on December 8th, crashing into the Potomac River during its launch. The failure was widely publicized, with newspapers declaring that powered flight was impossible. The Wrights, working in obscurity, prepared to prove everyone wrong. On December 14th, the brothers were ready for their first attempt. They flipped a coin to determine who would pilot. Wilbur won. The aircraft was positioned on a 60-foot launching rail the brothers had built. The engine roared to life, the propellers spun, and Wilbur released the restraining wire. The Flyer accelerated down the rail and lifted into the air, but Wilbur pulled the nose up too steeply. The aircraft stalled and dropped back to the ground after just 3.5 seconds, suffering minor damage. It was flight, Wilbur wrote later, but not sustained flight. The machine had been in the air, but I had not controlled it properly. We needed to repair the damage and try again. Repairs took 2 days. By December 17th, conditions were favorable. Steady headwind of about 27 miles per hour. Cold but clear. This time, Orville would pilot. 5 witnesses were present, members of the Kill Devil Hills life-saving station and local residents who had helped the Wrights with their experiments. At 10:35 a.m., Orville climbed onto the Flyer and positioned himself on the wing. Wilbur steadied the right wing as the engine started. Orville released the restraining wire and the Flyer began rolling down the launch rail. After about 40 feet, it lifted into the air, climbing to about 10 feet above the ground. For 12 seconds, Orville thought to control the aircraft as it pitched up and down like a bucking horse. The elevator was overly sensitive, and the aircraft's inherent instability made smooth flight nearly impossible. But Orville maintained control, keeping the Flyer airborne while moving forward under its own power. After covering 120 feet, less than the wingspan of a modern airliner, the Flyer settled back to the sand, touching down gently enough that no damage occurred. The flight was not elegant, Orville later recounted, but it was sustained, controlled flight powered by an engine. We had done what everyone said was impossible. When I climbed off the machine, Wilbur and I shook hands.
We didn't celebrate dramatically, we were already thinking about the next flight. The brothers made 3 more flights that morning, taking turns piloting. With each flight, they gained confidence and skill. The 4th flight, with Wilbur at the controls, lasted 59 seconds and covered 852 feet, a substantial distance that clearly demonstrated the aircraft's capability. But as the brothers and witnesses prepared to return the Flyer to its storage shed, a gust of wind caught the aircraft and tumbled it across the sand, damaging it severely enough that no more flights would be possible that year.
The world yawns. The Wrights telegraphed their father in Dayton with news of their success. The telegram was matter-of-fact, reporting the flight's duration and distance and informing him they would be home for Christmas. The story was picked up by a few newspapers, but largely ignored or dismissed. Most editors assumed it was either a hoax or an exaggeration. After all, Samuel Langley's well-publicized failure had just demonstrated that powered flight was impossible. "The newspapers reported our success," Wilbur wrote, "but nobody seemed to care. We had achieved powered flight, but the world was indifferent. We realized we would have to do much more to convince people that we had actually solved the problem." The brothers spent 1904 and 1905 refining their design and improving their piloting skills. They built a new aircraft, the Wright Flyer II, and began conducting flights from a pasture near Dayton called Huffman Prairie. The flights were more controlled and longer in duration, but the brothers worked in deliberate obscurity, refusing to allow photographs or detailed public demonstrations until they had secured patent protection and potential buyers. By 1905, the Wright Flyer III could fly for more than half an hour, execute figure eights, and be controlled precisely. The brothers had transformed a barely controllable machine into a practical aircraft. But still, most of the world remained skeptical or simply uninterested. When the Wrights approached the U.S. government offering to sell their aircraft for military use, they were rebuffed. When they contacted foreign governments, most dismissed them as cranks. "It was frustrating," Orville recalled. "We had solved a problem of flight, but nobody believed us. We realized that only dramatic public demonstrations would convince skeptics. But we also needed to protect our invention through patents and secure compensation for our work." The breakthrough came in 1908, when the Wrights finally agreed to public demonstrations. Wilbur traveled to France, where he gave a series of demonstration flights that stunned European aviation enthusiasts. His precise control and long-duration flights demonstrated conclusively that the Wrights had achieved what others had only dreamed of. Orville conducted similar demonstrations at Fort Myer, Virginia for the U.S. Army, though a crash that killed his passenger temporarily set back American acceptance. By 1909, the Wrights were internationally famous. Their achievement was finally recognized, and they received honors from governments and scientific organizations worldwide. They had proven that powered flight was not only possible, but practical. And they had done it through methodical experimentation, careful engineering, and persistent effort despite skepticism and indifference.
The technology they created, the Wright Flyer of 1903, seems impossibly primitive by modern standards. It was underpowered, difficult to control, fragile, and could fly only in calm conditions. Yet it incorporated several innovations that remain fundamental to aviation. The 3-axis control system, allowing the pilot to control pitch, roll, and yaw, is still the basis for aircraft control today. Modern aircraft use ailerons instead of wing warping and have much more sophisticated control systems, but the fundamental principle of controlling the aircraft in 3 dimensions traces directly to the Wrights' innovation. The propeller design methodology the Wrights developed established the foundation for propeller aerodynamics as an engineering discipline. Their systematic approach to testing and refining designs became the model for how aviation engineering would develop. Most importantly, the Wrights established that aircraft were piloted machines, requiring skill and judgment rather than inherently stable platforms that would fly themselves. This insight influenced aviation development for decades, with pilot skill being paramount until the development of sophisticated automatic control systems much later. The technology evolved rapidly after 1903. By World War I, just 11 years after the first flight, aircraft were being mass-produced for military use, with capabilities that would have seemed impossible in 1903. The basic principles the Wrights established, control surfaces, propeller design, structural techniques, remained valid even as speeds, altitudes, and capabilities increased exponentially.
The transformation of civilization. The Wright brothers' achievement in 1903 initiated a transformation of human civilization more profound than they could have imagined. Within 20 years, aircraft were carrying mail and passengers across continents. Within 40 years, thousands of aircraft were engaging in combat over Europe and the Pacific. Within 60 years, jet aircraft were flying faster than sound. Within 70 years, humans had landed on the moon using rocket technology that descended directly from aviation's origins. Aviation shrank the world, making distances that had required weeks or months of travel accessible in hours. It transformed warfare, introducing a new dimension of combat that would dominate 20th century conflicts. It enabled globalization of commerce and culture, with goods and people moving across the planet at speeds unimaginable before 1903. The economic impact was staggering. The aviation industry became one of the world's largest, employing millions and generating trillions in economic activity. Aircraft manufacturing drove advances in materials science, manufacturing processes, and engineering that spilled over into countless other industries. Aviation enabled tourism, business, and cultural exchange on unprecedented scales. The military implications were equally profound. Air power became decisive in modern warfare, with control of the skies often determining the outcome of conflicts. The strategic bombing campaigns of World War II, the nuclear delivery systems of the Cold War, the precision strike capabilities of modern militaries all trace their origins to that 12-second flight at Kitty Hawk in 1903.
The legacy of the Wright brothers. Wilbur Wright died in 1912 of typhoid fever at age 45 before he could fully witness the revolution he had helped create. Orville lived until 1948, long enough to see aviation transform from a curiosity to a critical element of modern civilization. He witnessed World War I's aerial combat, the development of commercial aviation, World War II's massive air campaigns, and the dawn of the jet age. The brothers' relationship was central to their success. They worked as a team, complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other through frustrations and setbacks. They argued constantly about technical details, but presented a united front to the outside world. Neither married. Their dedication to their work left little room for other relationships. "We were partners in every sense," Orville said late in life. "I can't imagine having accomplished what we did without Wilbur. We challenged each other, supported each other, and drove each other to excellence. The work we did together represents our combined capabilities, not individual genius." The brothers were self-taught engineers who succeeded where highly educated experts had failed because they approached the problem differently.
They emphasized practical experimentation over theoretical calculation, systematic testing over dramatic attempts, and solving the control problem over simply achieving momentary flight. Their methodical approach, learned from their bicycle business, proved more effective than the well-funded but poorly conceived efforts of more credentialed rivals. They also benefited from their isolation and independence. Without government funding or wealthy sponsors, they had no one to answer to except themselves. They could experiment freely, fail without public embarrassment, and pursue unconventional approaches without committees questioning their decisions. This freedom was both a hardship — they had to fund everything themselves from bicycle shop profits — and an advantage that allowed them to work at their own pace and follow their own instincts.
The continuing evolution. The Wright Flyer of 1903 was the beginning, not the culmination, of aviation development. The technology evolved with breathtaking speed. By 1910, aircraft could fly more than 100 miles per hour. By 1920, aircraft were crossing the Atlantic. By 1930, all-metal monoplane designs had replaced the wood and fabric biplanes that characterized early aviation. By 1940, fighters could exceed 400 miles per hour, and the jet engine was being developed. Each generation of aircraft improved on its predecessor, incorporating new materials, more powerful engines, better aerodynamics, and increasingly sophisticated systems. The basic principles the Wrights established remained valid, but the execution became increasingly complex and capable. Modern airliners cruising at 40,000 feet and 600 miles per hour are direct descendants of that fragile wood and fabric machine that flew for 12 seconds in 1903. The original Wright Flyer survives, displayed at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. It's a surprisingly small, fragile-looking machine, barely recognizable as an aircraft by modern standards. Yet it represents one of humanity's greatest achievements, the realization of a dream that had persisted for thousands of years, achieved through systematic effort, technical innovation, and the determination of two brothers who refused to accept that flight was impossible. Every commercial flight, every military aircraft, every spacecraft owes its existence to what the Wright brothers achieved on that cold December morning in 1903. They didn't just invent the airplane, they opened the sky to humanity, transforming civilization in ways still unfolding more than a century later. The 12 seconds Orville Wright spent airborne on December 17, 1903, changed human history more profoundly than almost any other single event, proving that with systematic effort, technical innovation, and persistent determination, humans could achieve what had been considered impossible for all of recorded history. The birth of aviation at Kitty Hawk represents more than a technological achievement. It symbolizes human ingenuity, the power of systematic experimentation, and the truth that revolutionary advances often come from unexpected sources, not from well-funded programs or credentialed experts, but from determined individuals willing to challenge conventional wisdom and persist despite skepticism and failure. The Wright brothers' legacy is not just the airplane, but the demonstration that the impossible can become possible when approached with the right combination of vision, method, and determination.